So probably everybody's heard of macros and tracking macros and kind of had some friend or, some commercial or something talk about it. Just to kind of start it off from the beginning, there's a lot of interest in this topic and a lot of people have kind of misinformation about it. I really look at it as a way to follow a nutrition plan versus like people getting too caught up on it being very reductionistic or that it's, too strict of a diet plan or it'll cause, some kind of disrelationship with food. I look at it as like a way to educate yourself and a way to learn about what macros are and a tool to have kind of in your belt moving forward. The goal is try to get through all this stuff in 30 minutes or so. So a few of these I'll go through pretty quick. And when we get done, we'll, have time for questions and everything too. But like I said, you can just type them in the little chat box and I'll see those down there as well. So we'll kind of go through who I am, what macros are and where do you find them, just to kind of set the baseline of what that's all about. And then we'll go through kind of a way for you to figure out your macros, which is a couple websites to look at. And then I'll talk about how to kind of plug in some numbers. And then why I think it can be really successful and helps people a lot. And then how to kind of get started tracking. And then good tips and, the things, kind of common things people run into or have trouble with right away. And then that'll be in the handout we send out. We'll send it with an email tomorrow too. And that ended up being 4 or 5 pages of tips and how to calculate your macros. And so I'll have a lot of that information that I'm going to cover today will be in that handout you get tomorrow as well. So me, if you don't know me, I'm an occupational therapist in Mexico orthopedics, also a nutrition coach. I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now after owning a gym and then selling a gym. And, that kind of figured out like nutrition is the key for everybody, whether it's health, whether it's performance, body composition, all that, no matter how much you work out, comes down to nutrition and what you put in your body. For me, I've done athletics my whole life, lots of triathlons in there, lots of endurance stuff. I guess I like to punish myself a little bit. So that's where that all comes from. Push myself a little bit, we'll say it that way. So let's define what are macros. Macros are the basic 3 units of food in general. So we have carbohydrates, we have protein, and then we have fats. And if we're looking at macros, then we really have to kind of just start with talking about calories. The simple way to think about nutrition is calories in and calories out. And if we're ingesting more calories than we're burning, then we're probably going to gain weight. And if we're taking in less calories than we're expending, then we're probably going to lose weight. Now that's overly simplistic because then there's stress hormones, there's life hormones, there's activity in general in our bodies, metabolic health, all those other things kind of come into play. But if we're looking at just calories as a place to start, then carbohydrates, 1 gram of carbohydrates contains 4 calories. And 1 gram of protein contains 4 calories. And 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories. And a calorie, just to kind of define that too, is just a unit of basically energy. And they've taken food and like compressed it in what's called a bomb calorimeter and basically found out like, hey, this food's a carbohydrate. It expends this much energy when we do that. Now, when you put it in your mouth and it goes into your body, probably a little bit different of how that works, but roughly that's something to go off of. Then we get into the micronutrients. So micronutrients are all those other little things, vitamins, minerals, trace elements, phytochemicals, antioxidants, probably a bunch of stuff we don't even 100% know what they are in foods, still trying to figure all that out. And then, of course, we got to talk about alcohol because it's kind of the unknown 4th macronutrient. It doesn't technically contribute to energy, but it's definitely a calorie when it goes into our body, and it causes a lot of things to happen in our body. So we'll talk about kind of calculating alcohol as well. So protein, the most important macronutrient, if we're going to kind of give them a ranking, our body has to run on protein. It's how we repair all our tissues, our organs, our muscles from workouts, how our hormones are produced. And then just some kind of interesting things about protein. It does have the highest thermic effect of food, so it takes us the most energy to burn that of any macronutrient. I think it's about like 27% of every calorie of protein is used to digest the protein. So, in essence, it's like, oh, if we eat more protein, we're going to burn more calories. And protein's also very satisfying. It fills you up. You probably had this experience where you eat, you get a steak and you eat half of it and you're like, man, I'm so full, I can't even finish that. Proteins are basic building blocks or amino acids, and that's all those little amino acids go into our body. Some are essential, which means we have to get them out of our diet. Some we can actually make in our body or create in our body. And that's what makes our joints healthy, makes our muscles grow, keeps us healthy. And, just to plug muscles a little bit too, it's by far the most metabolically important tissue in our body. It allows us to be healthy, stabilize our blood sugar, and then of course, move around and do the things we want to do. So where can you find it? This is always a big question with all my clients and macro tracking in general is, okay, I need a food with a certain amount of protein in it. And then what's a list of foods that have, just protein? And it's like, oh, well, this has proteins and carbs, or this has protein and fats. And so that list is not by any means, complete, but it gives you a good idea. Protein's mainly animals. Then you get into legumes, beans, and then a lot of dairy products. That's when you start mixing in a lot more carbohydrates and fat when you get looking at your proteins. And then I just kind of put that little disclaimer on the bottom, like not all proteins created equal. A lot of times people struggle when they start counting macros because they realize, oh, I like pork and I ate this pork and I got my protein, but I just went over 25 grams on my fat because that pork tenderloin that tasted so delicious has tons of fat in it. And it's like figuring out, okay, what's the leaner protein? And in the handout, you guys will get to, I put up a bunch of stuff on protein, actually a way more comprehensive list than this. And it talks about kind of working from leaner proteins to fattier proteins. So it'll give you a pretty good idea on those too. All right, carbohydrates. The body loves carbohydrates. It's our preferred source of fuel to energize our bodies. It's the fastest burning thing when we put it in our bodies. And it's also probably the biggest detrimental thing in terms of our metabolic health. Now, no food is inherently bad, but as we eat more processed carbohydrates and simple sugars, we're starting to realize how bad that is for our bodies. Not only our digestive systems, our cardiovascular systems, our overall metabolic health, everything kind of gets wrecked by those simple carbohydrates. But having said that, carbohydrates in their whole forms, fruits and vegetables mainly, they're fantastic for our bodies. They contain all those things we talked about in the micronutrients section. And a little caveat about carbohydrates is we can technically live without them. Like, they're not essential for life like fats and proteins. Now, that doesn't mean we can't live better with them. It's just a matter of kind of finding some balance of those things too. And, again, not all carbs are created equal, just like not all proteins. And if our carbs are created, then they're probably not that good for us. Let's just put it that way. If your carbs got labels on them, then you're reading labels. It's like, could be a better source of it. Not to say that I don't eat carbs with labels, but let's just put that there. So part of a carbohydrate is fiber. And I think talking about macros, we need to talk about fiber because there is a way to take out the amount of fiber we're eating with something and get kind of what's called our net carbs of whatever we're eating. So if you look at a label and there's 5 grams of fiber and there's 25 grams of total carbohydrates, technically your net is 20 grams of carbohydrates because you can take that undigestible or insoluble fiber out of there because it doesn't really contribute to like blood sugar or to energy. It just kind of passes through our body, but has a lot of very important things like I put up on the slide there too. And fiber is probably one of the more kind of lacking things we don't get from our carbohydrate sources. You know, as we eat less fruits and vegetables and less fibrous foods, you know, we're struggling in general, let's put it that way. And pretty much everybody I work with struggles to get enough fiber in their diets. And a safe, you know, what I think is low estimate, but a safe kind of estimate by Food and Drug Administration is you should get about 12 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. So if you're eating a 2,000 calorie diet, you're talking 24, I just rounded up to 25 grams of fiber. Check that out when you're starting to track some stuff and see, because as we get into that later, you'll see like, oh, MyFitnessPal can kind of track all that for you. And I bet you'll find like, wow, I'm pretty low on my fiber. So maybe I should get some more fiber in my life. All right, where can you find it? Fiber is basically where you would think it would be. Lots of veggies, lots of fruits, whole grains, which get kind of pushed and touted as being these like super healthy foods. Not everybody responds great to breads and pastas and oats and all those kind of things. So, you know, you got to kind of play those out in your own diet and in your own life and kind of see how you feel. But there's kind of two ways to think about vegetables. If they grow above the ground, then they're pretty fibrous. Those are good. A lot of soluble fibers, a lot of plant fibers. So that's the structure of the plant. And then if they grow underground, so now your potatoes, tubers, root vegetables, those guys are good fibers, but they're the insoluble kind. So those are the more fibers that kind of give us bulk to our stool and help with digestion and blood sugar regulation and help to kind of grow those healthy little bacteria in our guts too. All right, fats taste delicious. We love them. We're literally hardwired as humans to eat fat. It's kind of the first and highest caloric food source. So, you know, the fats that contain, or the foods that contain lots of fats tend to be the ones that animals eat as quick as possible because they get the most bang for their buck, so to speak. Because remember, we get 9 calories per gram from fat. So that's twice as much as we get from carbs and from proteins too. So it's easy to get a lot of fat in our diet. And you'll see that as you start tracking some things too, like, you know, where do you find fats? They're in all kinds of condiments. They're in all kinds of dressings and sauces. And, you know, you go to any restaurant, things taste amazing there because they don't tell you that they're like, you know, cooking your steak with like a pat of butter on top of it. And then they're making your vegetables with a couple tablespoons of oil. And of course they taste amazing because they're adding, you know, all that extra flavorful fat. And it's just a matter of getting enough fats, but getting the good fats and trying to get the right kind of ratio of some of those fats. Where do we find them? Nuts, seeds, a lot of fatty fish. You're going to get a lot of good fats from those. Then you get into your oils and cooking with those oils and ghee and butter. You know, those are all delicious. Avocados, those are delicious in my opinion. Eggs, if you can tolerate eggs well. The yolk is a very full, complete fat. And then lots of animal products. I mean, anything, you know, any kind of meat is going to have some amount of fat. And that's where in your handout, you'll have some kind of lean to more fatty animal products. And then, of course, bacon is basically all fat. People want to think it's protein, but it's not. And you'll see that as you start tracking. So, all right, the fourth macronutrient. Cheers to this one. Here's to the wine. So alcohol, you know, it does all kinds of things when it gets into our body. And the first thing it does is it essentially shuts off all other digestive processes because it's a poison and our body has to prioritize it and it has to digest it and it has to get it through the system. So there's kind of 2 ways to calculate it. And, you know, this is just to cover it now, and we'll talk about it a little bit later too, is it can be calculated as a carb or a fat, or it can be split into a carb and a fat. It's just that it contains calories, so we have to account for it when we're weighing and measuring, or we're tracking our macros too. So, you know, a little bit of alcohol is not a bad thing. Regular alcohol, that starts to kind of slow down some of the other processes in our body. And you know, the old thing with alcohol too is most of the time the inhibition goes. So then you end up eating a bunch of processed carbs or whatever else with it. So maybe it's not the alcohol that causes the problem. It's the, you know, box of cookies you eat once you've had 2 or 3 glasses of wine. So, all right, alcohol tracking. So here's a little example of what I mean there is, this is a label off of, oh, I think it's a wine. I can't remember what I got it off of exactly, but I think it's a wine. So if we're tracking it as a carb, then we're going to look at the total calories and we're going to say, okay, there's 103 total calories. So we're going to divide that by 4. So 4 calories per gram. And that's going to give us 25.75 grams of carbs, just to round up to 26 grams of carbs. So that's how you would track, like if you had one, this must be a beer, sorry, because it says 1 can or bottle. So that'd be a lot of, so that was how you track like that one beer. If you want to track it as a fat, you just do that same formula, 103, but this time you divide it by 9. So now you're going to get roughly 11.5 grams of fat. And then that's what you would put into MyFitnessPal to kind of estimate the calories coming from the alcohol. You could also split it up. You know, you could take half and half, say 51 calories divided by 4, and then 52 calories and divide it by 9, and then you're going to get some carbs and some fat. So that's kind of how that works. In your macro tracking kind of pro tips, there'll be kind of a formula that walks you through that, and you can do it a little easier, and then how to kind of estimate amounts when you're looking at like a glass of wine or something. So if we're looking at micronutrients, now we're into vitamins, which tons of essential vitamins. It's actually like 30 of them that we have to get through our diet if we want to, you know, live and be healthy for the most part. And some of the main, you know, big ones, A, D, E, and K, those are your fat soluble ones. Vitamin C, vitamin D. Vitamin D is actually even classified as a hormone. It's so important. And then of course the whole B vitamin spectrum. Minerals, now you're getting into kind of some of the little macro and micro minerals, talking things like zinc and selenium and phosphorus and potassium and all these little things that are contained in the good whole foods. And honestly, if you're eating a good clean diet with macros and, you know, you're not using all your carbs up on Pop-Tarts and tortillas, then you're going to get plenty of your micro and macro nutrients, your micro and your macro minerals, and you're going to get those guys in abundance, but a little bit of blood testing and figuring out what you may need specifically. You know, there's certain populations and ages that need some different ones. Vitamin D is one that people are typically a little deficient with. So let's get into kind of demystifying your macros here. You can do this now if you want to like open up these and kind of type in some numbers. You know, I'm not going to like kind of wait along and go. I'm going to talk about them and then we'll kind of move on. But this is also in your handout too. Honestly, finding your body fat percentage is helpful. And this is, you know, say a simple way to do it. Ooh, let me stop real quick because Stephanie asks, so what does your body do with food if you drink while eating? It basically shunts everything into your bloodstream. So you've probably heard of like people, if they're diabetic and they drink, they have like really high blood sugar and it causes like a blood sugar spike for them. And that's because their body has to prioritize the alcohol. So it just basically shoves everything into their bloodstream and it just kind of circulates in the bloodstream, either your body trying to shunt it out of the bloodstream to where it can, which is usually has to be the liver first, which is where the alcohol's at. And then it goes to muscle, which just takes a little bit longer, but it's basically floating around in your bloodstream, raising your blood sugar, causing your body to kind of go through this hormone cascade of trying to dump in some insulin to store this stuff. And your body's kind of fighting it through the liver because it can't, you know, it's getting second priority. So that was Stephanie's question, just about like what actually happens when you eat and drink at the same time. And so my advice on that too is like, try to separate the two. Like if you're going to have a glass of wine, maybe you do that like 30 minutes or an hour before dinner, or maybe it's an hour and a half or 2 hours after dinner. That way you kind of separate the two processes. So here you can go to this body fat kind of calculator. And it's an estimation. I actually did this not even on purpose, but it ended up working out really well. I just went and got an in-body scan yesterday, which is a bioimpedance scale. And if you're one of my clients too, you get that free at G&M, and we do that every month. But it's basically telling you, like giving you a bioimpedance of your soft tissue, so breaking up fat mass and lean muscle and cell hydration. And it's a pretty accurate thing. I mean, it's close to accurate next to an air displacement called a bod pod, and then kind of the most accurate being water displacement testing, you know, or somebody like cutting into you and finding out how much body fat you have. But anyway, this is a pretty close estimate of it here. If you go to the body fat calculator, and I did it, and it gave me, it said I was 14%, and then I did the in-body scan, and it said I was 11%. So, I mean, that just goes to show you, like, okay, there's some variance in there, because you're putting in a few things into that body fat percentage calculator that you're measuring, like your neck and your waist, and so you're putting in some numbers with it, along with age, height, and gender. But it's going to give you a rough estimate. Then you go down to the next one, which is your total daily energy expenditure, and you're going to put in some of those numbers along with the body fat percentage, and then it's going to ask for an activity level. So this is where a lot of people get, I don't know if I'd say in trouble, but they end up kind of screwing up their numbers by putting in this activity level, and they're like, oh, I'm super active, you know, I work out 5 days a week, and then they go to their job and they sit there and they get like 2,000 steps through the day, and it's like, well, probably not in the super active category. You're probably in the like sedentary to moderate activity level. And I don't think they give any examples in there of like activity levels, but you got to be like a professional dog walker or a professional athlete or working out, you know, 2 a days to be in the very active category, to be burning tons of calories. So just kind of go on the low end of that, of the activity level, be conservative with that. And then that'll give you, if anything, you undershoot with your macros or with your numbers. So then you got to kind of look at what your goal is. So it's giving you your calories, and you decide, okay, this is how many calories I'm at. This is how much carbs, protein, and fat. If my goal is to lose weight, then I usually tell people moderate weight loss is like 10% calorie reduction, up to pretty extreme is like a 25% calorie reduction. So if we're on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, 10% down to 1,800 calories a day, 25% would be 1,500 calories a day. So 500 calories less over a week is 3,500 calories. 3,500 calories is technically equal to 1 pound, but it's not really the way it works in the body. But that's, you know, a lot of people cut too fast and they get too low on their macros. Recomposition, if you haven't heard that term, is basically you're eating at maintenance of your energy level and what your body needs, but you're also trying to turn fat into muscle. You know, it's like the holy grail on the other side of the rainbow, right? It's like, oh, I want to turn all my fat into muscle, and I'm the same, you know, look at me. I'm still the same weight, but I'm all muscle now. That can happen to an extent, but it's pretty challenging. Like without a coach and somebody really giving you some pretty good feedback and making adjustments along the way, because your body will need it, and then kind of working with your metabolism, it's pretty challenging. Gaining weight, there is a category of people that are trying to do that. So it's like, you know, my young high school athletes and people that are in, you know, competitive CrossFit athletes, and they're trying to they go through gaining phases, and then they try to gain muscle. And that's just kind of the opposite of the loss. You're going to go into a calorie surplus there. Okay, so how do we get to the numbers? So I'll try not to over math everybody here, but if we're looking at what macro we want first, protein is our best friend. And I like to talk about like protein anchored macros. So protein's kind of that critical macronutrient. We tend to be kind of deficient in it, especially women. Women are almost always deficient in how much protein they're getting. And as we age, we need more protein to maintain the muscle that we're losing through aging. So having said that, I just start people right at 1 gram per pound of body weight. So there's a caveat to that, and it depends on how, if you're trying to lose weight, it depends on how much you're trying to lose. If you're 250 pounds and you're trying to lose down to 150 pounds, you don't need to eat 250 grams of protein. That's insane. That's a ton of protein, but it's also going to take up a bunch of your calories. What I tell people to do in that case is set your protein at what your goal weight's going to be. So it'd be 150 grams per day. Protein is 4 calories per gram. So if say you're 150 pounds, we'll just use an easy number, then you're going to be at 150 grams of protein. So relatively simple, right? All right, fat's a little more complicated. And this is where, especially with a lot of women on here, this is where fat's pretty important for hormonal health. Whether you're premenopausal or perimenopausal or postmenopausal, you need that hormone health maintained. So there is a baseline of fat to go down to, in 0.35 grams per pound of body weight. So if you just take your body weight, we'll go back to that. We'll say 175 pounds. If you take that times your 0.35, that's like 70 grams of fat per day. And that kind of can be adjusted up depending on what you're doing with your diet. If you're doing a lower carb, higher fat approach, then maybe your fat's at 0.5, but then you're going to have to adjust your carbs down to kind of stay in that total daily calorie number. And then your carbs are kind of what's left, in all honesty. So if we had that example of say a 175 pound person and they're a 2,000 calorie a day diet, they're going to get 175 grams of protein minus 70 grams of fat, and that's going to equal 1,330 calories. So you're just going to subtract that out of what your total daily calories are. So in that case is 2,000, and that's going to give you 670. And then you're going to divide that number, that's 670, by 4, because carbs are 4 per calorie. And that's going to give you 167.5 grams of carbs. And that's how I like to find somebody's macros. Again, with adjustments and directions depending on what your goals are exactly. If you're trying to, actually, I think I might have done it in this next one. Oh, here we go. Look at that. So here's our formula. This will probably help a little bit to see this visually. There's that 2,000 calories per day. Then we go into the protein calories. If you're a 175 pound person, 175, so that's really like 700 calories. The fat calories, if we're taking that 175 pound person times 0.35, it's 551 calories or 61 grams of fat. What's left would be our 749 calories of carbohydrates, and we divide that by 4 to get the 187. And then that puts our protein at 175, our fat at 61, and our carbs at 187. So I know we kind of flew through that pretty fast, and I see people like writing and calculating stuff. But you can always do that later, and then you can always just email me with questions or text me or whatever too. Does anybody have any questions about that since we're talking about it? And yes, Stephanie, that's for fat loss. Yeah. So sorry, this formula in general would be just to find, so when we were back here and we were in this TDEE calculator, so that's our total daily energy calculator, it's going to give you a number for what you need to sustain your current weight. And so from that, you can adjust up or down. So that's where you would say, like, if I'm going to lose weight or I want to lose weight, I'm going to take 10% off that number. So if it gave you 2,000, you would take that down to 1,800, and then you'd formulate all your macros off that.
Is that formula going to be in a handout?
Yes, that's in a handout too. And actually, like all 3 of these slides, like in a row, the 2. Okay. It's the very first part of the handout because it's basically walking you through like how to get your macros so that you can kind of go on from there, so to speak. And the reason that people try to overcomplicate macros is once you actually figure out how many calories you need, I mean, honestly, that's the hard part, because you got to kind of live life to figure out how many calories you need. So that's what we're going to talk about next, is just tracking and kind of figuring that out. And once you figure that out, then it's a matter of just adjusting from there and seeing what you do the best with. Some people are going to do better with a higher fat, lower carb. Some people are going to do better with a higher carb and a lower fat. It just kind of depends how your body reacts. So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about a little bit at the beginning. And, you know, unlike just counting calories, which just have you hit a certain number every day, and you can kind of fill that number with whatever you want, you know, now we're trying to look at it from a health perspective of like, no, I need a certain amount of protein to fuel my body and to maintain my muscle. I need a certain amount of fat for my hormones. And that, to me, makes it a lot more, not only long-term healthy, but it also makes it a lot more of a learning process. So has anybody ever heard of the IIFYM? So that just stands for if it fits your macros. So it literally means like, oh, my calories are 1,800 a day. I can get to 1,800 calories by eating Pop-Tarts and corn pops. And for dinner, I had a bowl of popcorn and a glass of wine. And it's like, yeah, it stayed, you know, if it fits in your macros, you can eat it. To me, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And it really was designed initially just for the fact of like, hey, you need 20 more grams of carbs, eat an apple. You know, it wasn't designed for like, you know, Pop-Tarts and popcorn, but people take it to that extreme where they're like, I can eat anything. I'm in my macros. I'm losing weight. It's like, yeah. And you're also like losing your hair and all your muscle too, because you're not eating any good nutrients. So that's where we get into like adjusting it based on your goals and your lifestyle. And then I like to say like it changes with the seasons and stages of life. I mean, I go through different stages through the year. If I'm trying to gain some muscle, I'm going to eat more. I'm going to try to be in a surplus. If I'm going on a beach trip in a couple months, then maybe I'm cutting a little bit. I want to look good on the beach, show off some abs, you know, that kind of stuff. But then as we age, it's going to adjust like how much protein you need. And maybe you're not tolerating carbs as well as you did 5 or 10 years ago. So maybe you're cutting the carbs back and upping the fats a little bit more. So that's kind of what I mean by that. And then when we talk about eating to be full, quality equals volume. So think about a cucumber, which is literally like 20 calories. It's like 4 grams of carbs in a cucumber. And that might weigh like 200 grams. And then you look at like a bag of chips, and that weighs like 4 to 5 grams, but it's got 400 calories in it. You know, the volume is what's going to keep you full. You know, fruits and vegetables, those things are filling, all the micronutrients and the fiber and everything else we talked about. So that's what I like people to get out of tracking macros, is kind of that learning process along the way. And that's why I think it's so much more effective for people. So here's what I kind of think are the keys to success for tracking is consistency. You know, you got to have that first. And that kind of goes back to figuring out how many calories you really need. You know, if you do well for 3 or 4 days of the week, and then the weekend hits and it's, you know, pizza and beer, and then you don't eat all day Sunday because you felt bad about the happy hour on Friday, and then, you know, you don't know where you're at. You're like all over the place with it, and you're not really consistent with it. Maybe you track for 4 or 5 days and you don't track for 2 or 3 days, and then you track for 3 more days. You know, you kind of end up being back and forth, and it's really trying to figure out kind of what is consistent for you and then how your body's reacting from that. So, you know, I just like to say, like, control as many variables as you can, kind of hit those macro targets, track them consistently, and then kind of look for patterns and identify things that work for you or don't work for you. And you'll start to see like how your nutrition affects your mood and your energy, and of course your body weight, but then also just kind of your mental function and your stress. And, you know, consistency is the key for sure. And then if we look at flexibility, probably everybody's heard some version of these. It's, you know, like you are what you eat, you are what you repeatedly do on a repeated basis, and you're a collection of your daily habits. And, you know, all those things over time kind of lead us to that consistency, and then having those habits in place so that we can try to manipulate things within those habits to, be consistent and kind of have that structure around it. So sustainability, that's really just getting into that groove of, this isn't a short-term diet plan. This isn't like a 1 month, 2 month thing, but it's something you can come back to and you can check yourself with, and that can be sustainable, over your lifetime. Sure, it can be for certain things throughout the year, but it's always that tool that's going to be there to kind of give you some direction again. Because, if I don't track anything for a long time, then I come back and I track stuff, even doing it for years off and on, I'm always surprised, like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was that much. Or, oh yeah, I guess I put an extra tablespoon of that in there or whatever. So, all right, let's start some tracking here. Couple little disclaimers. Just like anything new, take some time and energy, practice it to get efficient, kind of enjoy the process a little bit. We have to read and understand nutrition labels, learning weights of food and if they're cooked or raw, and then not really relying on the manufacturer all that much, because half the time labels are super inaccurate, and you'll find that as you start tracking and weighing things. Technology is your friend. There's so many apps and so many things out there that can make it so much easier. So let's look at a label here and kind of decide like what's going on with that label. So we got serving size on the top there, and that's first thing we want to see is like, what is the actual serving size? And usually they'll put it in a couple different ways. So here they have it in grams, and they have it in a container, like a half a cup. And then you're going to look at fats, carbohydrates, and protein. Some things will break fats into different fats: saturated, trans, monounsaturated, and so forth. Carbohydrates will always break it into total carbohydrates. They'll give you fiber if it's in there. They'll give you sugars, which that's actually required, and sugar alcohols are also required on labels for things to have those on there. And then the last thing is going to be protein, and it's not going to tell you anything but protein. It's not going to tell you the quality. It's not going to tell you the amino acid profile, unless you're looking at an actual protein supplement. It's like a whey protein or something like that. That's kind of your basics on the label. Tracking tools. So things to have in your kitchen, a nice little kitchen scale. It's pretty simple. Those are, 10, 15 bucks. Make sure, I like it digital. It's just way easier. Make sure it works in grams and ounces. Most of them do like 4 or 5 different things: pounds, kilograms. You can do all kinds of stuff in there. Measuring cups and spoons for liquids and solids, because you're going to run into some of those. And then I like to just have some consistent bowls, so I know I can put it on my scale. I can tear out the scale. That bowl's a certain size, and so I can put something in there. And then you can start to actually like get awareness of it. You're like, oh, I have this certain bowl. If I have this food in there, I know it weighs this much. Next time you fill up that bowl, you kind of look at it and you're like, oh yeah, this is about that same amount. Then you weigh it and you're like, oh yeah, I was right. So you start to get that eye for it. Tracking apps. There's so many of them, it's nuts anymore, but MyFitnessPal is the biggest database. The free version works great. You can do the paid version, which I think is like 70 bucks a year or something. So it's still a pretty good deal. But it has so many cool features. I could have done a whole webinar on that. And there's tons of videos out there on how to use some of the different apps. But MyFitnessPal has a scanning feature where you can like scan a label. You can put together your own meals. You can change the names of meals, and you can customize all kinds of stuff in there. Kind of the big thing with the apps is that you go in and it sets up your profile, the first time you use the app, and then it'll ask you what you want your macros set at, and you go in and you can set your macros up. So it's good to know kind of where you want to be. The only one slightly confusing thing with MyFitnessPal is it'll set you up in percentages. So you have to look at percentages, and then I think you have to buy the premium version to do it in grams and like really dial it into like down to the gram. Otherwise it kind of estimates you in like, I think it's 5 grams plus or minus. So the cool things about MyFitnessPal, this is some of them. You can like scan codes on there. You can do smart select, so you can use a barcode and then you can search it. MyFitnessPal actually has like verified foods in there, which is kind of cool. It has like a little green check mark next to it. And so you know you're getting exactly what that food should be, or even foods from restaurants will have their verified foods in there. Then you can always check it like outside sources. You can double check it for accuracy. You can look up in different databases like Calorie King or USDA websites and look at different foods if you really, you can't figure something out. I just tell people, get as close as you can. It's better than nothing. All right, customizing your tracking. So in MyFitnessPal, you can name your own meals. You can change them from breakfast, lunch, and dinner to different meal names or snack names. You can break down your meals, and you can actually like put in a meal, and it takes a little time at the beginning. You put all the ingredients in, you put the number of servings in, and then it saves that meal for you. And then you can hit that meal in the future and put in 2 servings, and boom, all the macros are put in there for you. So it's a little work up front, but then it kind of saves you some time, in the end. And then you can go into the diary page and you can customize things. A lot of these tips are in the handout too, just how to kind of customize it into like focusing on your macronutrients versus the percentages. And then keeping tabs on kind of how you're doing is you can go down to the bottom of MyFitnessPal and you can track nutrition, you can track water, exercise, your weight. Like it gives you kind of all the different things you might want to see along the way. And it gives you like a little bar graph, and it shows you your macros you've eaten and kind of lets you work along through the day. So, all right, a couple of things that I think are important with weighing and measuring. If it's measured, it can be changed, right? So this is where I think we get this awareness around food. We start seeing how much things actually weigh, and what really is 4 ounces of chicken, and how many grams is a cup of black beans, and we start to kind of see those things. So if you're accurately measuring it, then you can definitely change what you're doing. And I kind of throw in that accurately word because a lot of times people think they're doing pretty well, but you can be off by 300 to 500 calories because you're not really measuring that great. If a chocolate chip falls off the scale, it still counts if you eat it. You just got to weigh it. So eat the chocolate chip, but you got to weigh it. You got to count it. So being as accurate as possible is definitely important, just to really get a true picture. And again, it's a tool. And so I would think about it like this slide, I think actually gives you a good idea. You take the peanut butter, put the tablespoon in there, slide it out. You didn't measure that tablespoon, but you thought it was a tablespoon. And so you put it in MyFitnessPal, but you didn't weigh it. And that tablespoon that you're like, oh, a tablespoon's 15 grams. That's perfect. It's actually 25 grams. So there was like 10 extra grams in that tablespoon of peanut butter. And you can start to see like how something really calorie dense, like a nut butter or some kind of fat, it's like, okay, if there was an extra 10 grams, kind of multiply that over several days. Now we're getting into, if you did that twice a day, 126 extra calories a day. By the end of the week, it's 882 extra calories. That's where little things like sneak in, and you're just like, dang, I don't know why I'm not losing weight. Should be right on with my macros. And this is kind of a similar little thing too. It's like, how much is 1 extra gram of peanut butter? It's kind of showing you that. 10 extra grams of coffee creamer. Coffee creamer is always a tough one for people. Some of the calorie dense stuff like butter, or even you get into like some of the veggies and, it might say a medium banana. Well, what's a medium banana mean? I don't know. I've never seen a label on a banana to say it's a medium or a large or a small or whatever. So actually cutting it up and weighing it without the skin is going to give you like a true measure of how much banana you're actually getting. And then, toast can be off too. You look at the side of a label on a package of bread, not every piece is cut symmetrically and it could be a little bit different density. So just actually weighing some of that stuff will make a big difference. So I think the biggest thing with tracking is being a little bit obsessive about your meal prep. And I think the meal prep can be efficient if you're doing quite a bit of it at once, but it also leads to being really accurate with what you're eating, because I'm sure we've all run into this situation, maybe even today, where you're like, oh, it's lunchtime, crap, what am I going to eat? Oh, I'm really hungry. Oh, look, Chick-fil-A's over there. I'm going to go there. And it's like, oh, you didn't plan that out. So you ended up just having to eat what was out there. And then you had to put something into MyFitnessPal, which Chick-fil-A is actually in there. And you could probably put that stuff in there, but to stay within your macros is always super challenging. So meal prep efficiency. I mean, at our house, we do a lot of meal prep on Sundays, and then usually a Wednesday night is a big meal prep night, and a lot of cutting stuff up. You know, I might cook 2 or 3 different meals at once, even though we're just going to eat one of them. Measuring things out and putting them into Ziplocs or putting them into, I like the glass Snapware. So you can just pop the lids off of those and it's already measured in the container, and then you can just heat it up in the glass Snapware. Freezing things for, like, say you make a morning smoothie and you weigh out 6 different bags because you're going to make a smoothie every morning for the whole week. And you put all the ingredients in the baggie, and then in the morning, all you got to do is pop that in the blender and pour in your half cup of almond milk or whatever liquid you want in it and blend it up. And you already have that in MyFitnessPal. And that's, you know, literally takes like 3 minutes. And it can be super quick because you kind of prepped for it, versus every time you got to get out your fruit and weigh it. And then you got to weigh your yogurt. And then you go, oh, I got the scoop of protein powder. And it's like, that takes 10 minutes versus 2 minutes because you took 15 minutes to do it once. So that's just kind of my little rant on meal prepping. And, you know, a lot of those little tips are in the pro tips as well. I put this one in here, and this little infographics in your pro tips, because it kind of gets into eating out. And it's like, okay, I don't expect people to take their scale with them and be weighing things at a restaurant. You know, you go to some nice restaurant, you better have some really, really dialed in goals if that's what you're doing, because you're just weird at that point. But eating out, you can kind of use this hand method, and it talks about like the ounces of something versus, you know, like kind of the center of your palm versus your full palm versus the ulnar side of your hand, and getting a half cup versus a full fist. And I've seen different infographics like this too. Some people talk about a palm size serving of protein, because your palm is individual to you, is usually somewhere between 2 to 4 ounces, but that, you know, guys need 2 palm size servings of protein. Females need a palm size serving of protein at a meal, which I think is a little light on the protein. But anyway, that gives you an idea of like teaspoons, tablespoons, cups, and ounces. I think the best thing for eating out is try to plan ahead a little bit. I mean, you can look up pretty much any restaurant's menu. You could look through what you're going to get. You can look some of that stuff up on MyFitnessPal, and you just take 10 or 15 minutes and look some of that stuff up. It might help you a lot with your decision. And then when you're there, you've kind of already made that decision, like, oh, this is what I'm going to get. You know, take the chips away. I don't want those. I don't want the bread basket. This is what I'm getting for my dinner. And you already kind of know. So this is one of my favorite infographics. I know it's kind of squished and small here, but it's on your handout. And this is that getting into what do I want to eat, when it's like kind of single sources of some of these different things, but then also when it's kind of some of these more combined foods. So it gives you some ideas of like combined carbs and fats, and then I just need a carb, I just need a protein or a fat, combined carbs and proteins. So this is by way of working against gravity. This is a really cool infographic they put up. This is one I actually tell people, like, print this sucker out and put it in your kitchen, and it just kind of gives you some ideas of some of those combined things, or even some of those single macro sources. All right, so what now? Of course, I'm taking a really long time, so I don't know if anybody's got questions at this point, but we're going to say what now is get your numbers. And your handout kind of goes through this in this steps. Figure out what your numbers are, and then kind of get started on trying to track. I say focus on food quality and track how you feel when you ate, how full you were, how long it took you to eat, some of those things to start seeing some patterns. And really just try to rate your level of self-awareness. You know, the more you know yourself and your emotions and how you digest things, and what foods you do the best with. That's going to just make you feel that much better, and kind of turn this into a lifestyle. You want it to be a tool you can refer to, but you want to learn from this and be able to, be your own captain of your own ship and body, right? All right, nutrition coaching special. So, after doing this for years with people and having a background in exercise and movement, I feel like I get a lot of people, and it's putting all this stuff together. So I know up front this package looks really expensive, but especially if you live locally, this is something where I'll do an individual meet with you. We do a movement assessment, we give you a custom exercise plan. We do all your nutrition, all your coaching, mindset training, habit adjustments, lifestyle adjustments, kind of learning all that stuff together. What I like to talk about is kind of working into all those 4 pillars of health. And it's a 6-month plan. So that $2,499 is divided over those 6 months. And if it goes beyond that, then we just drop it down to $229 a month. But that includes a little bit of everything you would possibly need. And I have a couple people I'm doing this with, and they're doing really well. And it's really fun because you get to see kind of changes from every angle. General nutrition coaching. This is, I like to say, like 3-month commitment is kind of the minimum. And the reason for that is we're trying to make lifelong sustainable changes. So very little gets accomplished in less than 3 months. That's going to be, you're going to stick with for the rest of your life. So 3 months is kind of the minimum. It's $229 a month. Most of the time I work with people for 6, 8, 10 months, a year. I've got some clients that I've been working with for over a year. And this includes a little bit of everything on the nutrition side, along with, we're meeting a couple times a month at a minimum. We're going to talk about movement and exercise. I'm going to give you some general stuff, just not a custom plan. And I'm not going to know you as well in terms of movement and maybe what you need in terms of corrective exercise or something to work around injuries. You do get monthly in-body scans with that. And then I always like to say in there, the deep work is what changes us. That's the mindset training and learning those habits over time. And then at the end, it's transitioning into ongoing nutrition maintenance. So that kind of happens at the end. And that's all my blabbing for a really long time. So questions, what do we got for questions on here? Oh, Stephanie wrote a question I didn't even see. Do you focus on total carbs or net carbs? And if you want, just unmic yourself and ask a question too, or unmute yourself, I guess I should say. So I actually focus more on total carbs because I look at the fiber in there as just kind of like the bonus for me. Having said that, I get quite a bit of carbs because I work out a lot. I'm pretty active and I do better with carbs. So, I'm getting several hundred carbs a day. So that's not as big a deal for me. But I also focus on my fiber intake too. So I track that to make sure I shoot for like 50 grams a day, which would send a lot of people to the toilet really quickly. But you work your way up to that and kind of condition your system to get more adjusted to it. But that's a good question. I think it's a little more true to just take your total carbs than to net out the carbs and say like, oh, I got 5 grams of fiber, so these other 5 didn't count. That's my opinion on that, though. Anybody else? It's got to be some questions. Maybe not. It was just such a comprehensive webinar. No question.
I'm curious as to what your viewpoint is on not Atkins, because I think it's a horrific dietary plan, but truly like a well-formulated like a keto plan where you're getting your fats from plant sources and your carbohydrates are all coming from, vegetable matter, and you don't go crazy high on your protein. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a certain population can do really well on that for significant amounts of time. It is very challenging to do. Like you have to be pretty dialed in. You have to prep well. You have to be pretty controlling of your environment and when you go out to eat and what you're doing in social situations. But I agree, Atkins can be a little what we call like a dirty keto, you know, where people are like, oh, bacon and, you know, I get all my fats from pork. And it's like, yeah. But having said that, it also depends on your lifestyle. Like if you're somebody that does more high intensity exercise and you like to lift weights and some of that more explosive stuff like that, it's pretty challenging to do that on a keto diet because you just don't have the carbohydrates available and you deplete them really quickly and your energy is going to tank pretty fast in some of those workouts. I actually prefer, if I'm going to put somebody in a ketogenic state and we're going to kind of work in a keto diet, you know, I like to just call it really like a high fat, moderate protein, low carb diet. Then we do what's called cyclical ketosis. So we'll go into ketosis for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, and then you come out of it for a few days and let your body kind of re-carb load a little bit. And you don't go crazy, you just get a little bit more carbohydrates in that time frame, and that's going to make your body remember like, oh, I can store glycogen in my muscles again and in my liver, and I can kind of fuel myself with some of that. And then you go back into ketosis and you try to do that for another week or 10 days or 2 weeks, and you kind of cycle in and out of that. And that seems to really work well for people because a little bit more of a hot term, but it's like, oh, this makes you more metabolically efficient. So you can adjust between burning carbohydrates and burning fats for fuel. And it really does. It helps your whole metabolism improve if you're going through this kind of cyclical keto approach. Hey, Dylan.
What about?
Thoughts?
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, what about intermittent fasting?
That was my question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's great too. And there's kind of like a little bit of lingo around it. It's like, okay, what's intermittent fasting versus time restricted eating? It's kind of the same thing. It just depends how you're approaching it. I think people do really well on like an 18-6 kind of approach or even a 16-8 approach where, I mean, essentially, if you really simplify it, it's like, hey, just skip breakfast, you eat lunch and dinner, and then you kind of compress your eating into that window. And there's all kinds of studies that show people do well and they lose weight on intermittent fasting or time restricted eating because you're literally like, you're compressing how much time you have. So you just tend to eat less calories, you know, and you become a little bit calorie deficient, which is typically good if you're trying to lose weight because you just have less time to eat. I mean, it's hard to eat 2,000 calories in 2 meals. I mean, it can be done for sure. But so I think it's great because then it also teaches you that little period of time where your body has to find out, okay, I don't have an immediate fuel source. You know, I didn't get up and eat toast right away or bagel, and I didn't eat all the way up till right when I went to bed. And so your body has to kind of go to some of those fat stores, and it makes it a little bit more metabolically efficient. You can kind of fluctuate back and forth between carbs and fat. Having said that, women, especially women as they get older, don't tend to do that well on intermittent fasting for probably hormonal reasons more so. So you got to kind of see how you feel with it, how your body does with it. And then again, it's the lifestyle thing. I mean, I was doing some of it for a while, and I like to work out first thing in the morning. And so then I wouldn't eat breakfast. I'd work out, I wouldn't eat. And by like 11 o'clock, I was like crawling on the ground, like looking for scraps of food because I was like, oh, I'm so hungry. But again, like I wasn't actively trying to lose weight. So when you're already pretty lean and you're in that situation, it's probably better to like, I should have probably done and skip dinner versus breakfast. But dinner's usually like with the family and you're at home and it's a little bit more social. So it's a little more challenging to do it that way. So just kind of how it fits in with your lifestyle. A lot of people do great and they're just like, I forget about breakfast half the time anyway. So by the time I think about it, it's 11:30 or 12 and I just eat lunch and dinner and then I'm good. So. Anybody else? Somebody else was asking a question. Oh, I think you're.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Lily. I mean, Lori.
Lori.
It says Lily on your.
Does it? Oh, how funny. what's the lowest number of calories you think you should go to? I mean, is there like a point where it's
Baseline.
too low?
Yeah, I mean, you get in like under 1,000, that's not very many calories. I mean, you're going to be, you better be pretty sedentary at that point, and you better not care too much about muscle mass, because you're literally in the point of like, okay, daily functions. I mean, it's pretty rare that somebody's basal metabolic rate is under 1,000. Even somebody that's like, 5 feet tall and weighs 95 pounds, their BMR is probably still 1,200 something. And that's just your baseline need of calories to maintain your everyday living. So having said that, you can go into that for short periods of time. Maybe it's 2 weeks where you go into a major calorie deficit and you kind of cut your calories and you push really hard to lose weight. And then you come out of that and you get to maintenance calories at 1,500 or something. Where people tend to confuse that a little bit, and this is kind of a little bit onto a tangent, but people are like, oh, I'm eating 800 calories a day. And it's like, well, are you really eating 800 calories a day? And like, if you're truly tracking all that and you're really only getting 800 calories a day, that's pretty challenging. Like, you're going to struggle to like function at 800 calories a day. And you're going to be thinking about food all the time and drawing pictures of brownies and cupcakes. And, it becomes pretty uncomfortable. So I always take that with a grain of salt when somebody's like, I only eat 800 calories a day. I'm like, really? So, but having said that, it's hard to get enough fat. It's hard to get enough protein. So that's when you start to just kind of lose muscle mass. And when you're dieting really quick and it's a hard, fast cut like that, a lot of that is going to be lost in lean tissue. So you start losing muscle, you start losing kind of supportive connective tissue, and you lose some fat for sure. But it's like, well, if you lost, 5 pounds of muscle and 2 pounds of fat, it's like, I don't know. To me, that's not a good trade-off. It's like, I don't want to lose 7 pounds that way.
We get to be the first ones to eat on it.
Anybody else? Good questions. Anybody? No? Okay, well, tomorrow, I'm gonna send out the recording, and then she'll send an email to, or one of us will, with the tips and tricks and all the little pro tips and tricks and how to calculate your macros and everything. She made it look really awesome. I just sent her like a scruffy looking Google Doc and she put it all together and made it look good. So, and it's like, I don't even know, 4 and 5 pages. It's pretty long. So, yeah. And then if, I try to put out content every week, stuff about questions I get. I mean, everything you guys just ask, questions like that, questions about keto, questions about calories and protein, and a lot of stuff on kind of mindset and habits. And so every Wednesday we put out videos, put out all kinds of content through the week, and then send out a little newsletter at the end of the month that kind of covers our major points of content that we did that month. And Emily keeps me all organized and all that stuff. So love her for that. But thanks for attending, and try to do another one of these in 6 or 8 weeks. And I don't know, my initial thoughts, you guys can give me a little feedback on this, is maybe it's on like fad diets, and like, then we talk a little bit about keto, and we talk a little bit about, South Beach, and we talk about the difference between Atkins and keto, and then, go into like some of those things that there's just so much misinformation about out there, and it's so hard to weed through what is good and what's bad, and what oh, well, I saw this Instagram picture of this girl and she said she did keto and she lost 25 pounds in a week, and it's like, I mean, there's just so much stuff out there like that. So that's my initial thought, but anybody can always email me or, DM us in any of the social media stuff and say like, hey, what about this for a topic, or what about that? So this one seemed like it was pretty popular. Had a lot of people respond to it, and I just had like people texting me, oh, I forgot it was tonight. Oh, I missed it. I'm like, oh, geez.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It was very informative. My entire family.
Good. All right. Well, have
Thank
a
you.
good night. You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.